Um, I'll get going. My name's Dave Dye. I'm an architect and professor in the Mechanical and Architectural Design Department. Also in my department here are Charlotte Pease, who's also an architect in our department, and Tom Boersma, who is our department chair, who's a mechanical designer. And Scott Shaw is also here today. I'll introduce him more when we get to his part of the presentation. But you came here today to find out about two approaches to practice learning, and sort of my nuts and bolts approach, and Scott Shaw will find out his approach when he presents. And then also after that we'll talk about more details of the unique partnership between Lawrence Tech and Grand Rapids Community College. But the first 2 years of the degree for the Masters of Architecture can be taken here. And this program, this Designing and Building a Green Home, is from the Sustainable Residential Design class. And this is something that I started about 5 years ago. And this is just an explanation of that. And that is my view of practice learning. So, and what is a green building? Okay. And a green building is considered a sustainable building. The purpose of producing green or sustainable buildings is to meet the needs of the present society while preserving the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Okay? And that's an important thing to consider. We don't want to be taking away all the resources from the future generations. We want to save them for the future generations, and that's what sustainable architecture is about. Now, a good example of green architecture is the Grand Rapids Art Museum. It was the first gold museum, gold LEED building in the country. Now, the area that the Sustainable Residential Design class deals with is in residential design, okay? And there's two ways of rating, green ratings for residential buildings. One is the National Association of Home Builders has a rating, and then the U.S. Green Building Council has a LEED rating, which is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Okay? Now, we have a residential construction program, and we build 2 LEED homes a year. Grand Rapids Community College does that. And so suddenly, I started working with Dwayne McIntyre. And in 2008, the GRCC residential construction program, led by Dwayne, had been building LEED homes for about 3 years. And I thought, boy, I want to find out what's going on with that. And so I talked to my dean, and she said, sure, take a sabbatical, go out and help build a house. So I thought, that's a good idea. So I volunteered to work with Dwayne's group of students. Okay? And we built the house from February to May of 2008. And I worked with Dwayne's crew, and we built a LEED home for Habitat for Humanity. Now, this is the group. I took the picture, but at the start in February, and that was our final home. Now, it doesn't look like a really innovative home, but it's very well designed. And here's what sort of determines a LEED home, okay? There are different categories that determine a LEED home. Using innovative solutions to energy efficiency is one part of it. Building in urban areas with transportation and community amenities. All of these categories is how you get points for a LEED home, a sustainable home. If you build it in a very dense area with a lot of amenities around it, with a lot of public transportation, with parks, you get points. Building on a compact, sustainable building site. If you're building in an area that has 10 homes per acre, you get points. Using water-efficient plumbing fixtures, okay? You get points for that. Building a tight, energy-efficient envelope. Dwayne McIntyre, who was the contractor for this, believed very much that if you can build a very tight home, you can bring that furnace from 100,000 BTUs down to 20,000 just by building a tight, well-insulated home. It does a lot just to do that. Making maximum use of building materials and managing what goes in the landfill. Can you imagine how much material from a house while it's being constructed goes into a landfill? If you can keep it under a half a ton, you get points for that, for a 1,700 square foot house. Having good indoor air quality, free of gases and pollutants. You get points for low VOC paints, which is volatile organic content. You get points for using the right plywood. You get points for a good air filter in your furnace. And finally, you give you're building this Habitat for Humanity house. Now this is really sort of a high-end house, believe it or not. But after you build it, you have to then educate the people on how to live in it. I mean, you've got to be able to maintain that house, okay? And all those different categories will give you points, okay? Those are what I just referred to. And you add them all up, and each of these houses get about 65 points, okay? And that's considered a silver LEED home. And so when you're done, and the different ratings are certified, silver, gold, and platinum, okay? So the home we built with Dwayne was considered a silver home, okay? You get different ratings for LEED ratings, and these are all sustainable homes. Now, sometimes we can even take it at a higher level and make them to a gold house, a gold LEED home. Okay, so I'd had all this education. They took me in, build houses. I thought, well, if they can build houses, then our area should be able to design the houses. And so in winter of 2009, the Sustainable Residential class of GRC, the Architectural Technology Program, started designing houses. We designed 15 different prototype houses, okay? And for Habitat for Humanity. And we did one that was 22 foot wide and one that was 20 foot wide, okay? And so we went through the process of visiting the homes, visiting the construction sites, meeting with the client, okay? Doing some preliminary designs, doing some final designs. And we made our final design on April 29th, and the Habitat asked us for a copy of everything. And so I said, okay, we'll give you a copy. And there's some examples. This was one. This was a 4-bedroom house. Very simple house, 2-bedroom house, okay? And this was another 4-bedroom house, okay? And so we gave the prototypes, and we sort of stamped them so anybody in Habitat for Humanity throughout the state could use them. So that was our first stab at it, okay? And then I said, well, you know, prototypes are fine, but we really need a site. And they said, okay, we can accommodate that. So Habitat for Humanity gave us 2 sites in Wealthy Heights area. Now, does anybody know where the Wealthy Theater is? That's a theater in Grand Rapids built on a street that used to have streetcars running down it, okay? Well, that Wealthy Heights area has a lot of homes in it that either need renovation or need replacement. And so we got 2 sites from that, 2 proposed building sites, and one was a very tight site. This was the site here, this site right here, this is the students, but this site right here only allowed about an 18-foot wide home. I went, okay, well, that's a good challenge for students. Here's the site, try building on it. And so 14 students gave a preliminary presentation to Habitat for Humanity, said, here's our home. And Habitat, when they design a home for Habitat, you have to keep in mind that not only you design a energy efficient home, you must also on the first floor design a barrier-free home, because they've got to be able to let their clients, if they're physically challenged, be able to use the home. And so in April of that year, we made presentations, and this happens to be Joe Turner who made this presentation, and he designed this house for the 18-foot wide lot, okay? And so after that presentation, they selected 2 houses to go to the state Historical Development Commission. Because the state, this was a historical development area, so the state wanted to look at them, and they said they wanted to use this one and this one, okay? And so they went to the state for review, and they went to a review, and we found out they wanted a different style house. I said, okay, well then that's it. But the students had an opportunity to design for a historical site. So I said, okay, we don't want to get into historical. Historical's great, but if the state's going to keep us from building, we need a suburban lot. So we went to the suburbs. So next year, we were given sites in suburban Wyoming and Grand Rapids. And these are actually, near Richmond Park. One was near Richmond Park, if you know the northwest side of the city. And so we were given a site in both Grand Rapids and Wyoming, okay? And I thought, well, let's do some training of these students. And so Habitat for Humanity, who we've been working for of Kent County, said, okay, we'll take our construction manager to you, and we'll take you out to sites, and we'll show you the dimensions of the site, we'll show you how level they are and what you have to build with. And I said, cool. And so one of the first steps was meeting with the construction manager from Habitat at the proposed building sites to get the lay of the land and the site dimensions, Okay, so we did that. And I thought, well, another good education is maybe let's go out and go visit. Now, this is one of the Habitat for Humanity houses that Grand Rapids Community College makes, the designs or builds. And this is Dwayne McIntyre, who I worked with. And so I said, Dwayne, we're coming out to visit you. I want to see how that house goes together. So all the students went out and take a look at the house. And this was sort of an unusual Habitat for Humanity house because it had a garage. You don't have garages in Habitat for Humanity, but the city required it. Another reason, you know why another reason you don't have garages? It takes down your lead points by 3 or 4 because garages have pollutants in it, and which brings down the air quality of the house. So, but we went out there and looked at the house, and then we visited the proposed building site. We visited a house under construction, and then I have the students go through and review zoning and building codes, state building codes, and habitats codes, which are a requirement of barrier-free on the first floor. Okay? And then we meet with the client, you know, is this what we're looking for? And they give us feedback. And then we did a preliminary design with Habitat for review. And then we did a final design. We did a presentation. We had 8 teams doing presentations. Is that what I said? 8 student groups. And 2 were chosen. Now, here were the 2. One was a 3-bedroom home, and one was a 4-bedroom home, okay? We have to put a little more color in these, but that's what they were, okay? This is using Revit. That's what we train on. And so they chose these. They liked the floor plans, and they said, let's see if we can build one of those, okay? Well, Habitat interviewed a family that needed a 4-bedroom house, and bingo, we've got one. So that one student design, the 4-bedroom house, was chosen, and it was on a fast track. We didn't have enough time, so I don't know if you know this, but we have a residential construction program here that has a lab, and so what they did is they built the house in the lab, in modular sections, and then brought it out to the site and constructed it. Okay? So there it is. It's on Willard. And my department head, Tom, knows Willard because he was raised on Willard. He thought it's a nice neighborhood to build in. And so they built it on 1831 Willard. And the house was completed in December of 2012. And one thing you must know about Habitat for Humanity, when they are done with the house, they dedicate the house. So in January of 2013, they dedicate it. They actually say a prayer for it, for the people who are going to be in the house. And then after the dedication, the family occupies it. So that's the house that student designs and student build. The GRCC residential construction program built that house. Okay, so we were very pleased with that, and we thought, well, let's try a couple more. Okay? And now, one thing to keep in mind. Remember how I was telling you that these are silver houses, silver LEED homes, but you can get them to gold, which is your next level up in sustainability. And you can do that by improving the solar orientation, facing them south. You can do it by locating the house closer to community resources, you know, more stores, closer to bus routes, closer to parks. You can improve the rating by putting a rain garden on the home site, okay? By managing runoff with the roof with a rain barrel and recycling gray water. That also will increase your points. Now, this is one that's sort of controversial. They say chip the drywall and put it in the topsoil. I don't know if I agree with that, but it's a way of not putting the drywall in the landfill. And then finally, wrap the hot water pipes. And the final category is just improve, put more insulation in the house, put a better filter for air quality in the house. So all those things will improve the quality and the higher LEED rating for the house. Okay, so again, we go through the whole process again. The process continues. We see sites. We divide the students into teams. We visit the proposed building sites and construction sites. We utilize building and zoning codes and habitat guidelines. And then we go to meet with Habitat to present preliminary plans, okay? And so we go, okay, well, and we present it to them, and all of a sudden, they're looking at these plans, they said, oh my gosh, that one right there, I'll turn it to that one right there, that one we want for one of our clients because it was a barrier-free home, and they liked how it was laid out. So I said, okay. And so they encouraged this one designer, who James is now at Lawrence Tech. James went on to Lawrence Tech. Deb is, NICAMP is still in this area. And they said, we want to take that. Now, the status of that, I guess they said it was a little bit too luxurious for them. But But they did very much like it. I've never seen a client light up quick like that, but they were glad to have it. So we continue to do this. Sometimes they get built, sometimes and right now we're still in the process. I actually may even have one of my students here. And we're working on habitat homes and sustainable residential design class. We continue our work with Habitat for Humanity to design compact, energy efficient, zero-step houses in urban areas for our families. And we just continue that work. And now we have their prototypes and we're trying to figure out how to improve them. So that's our view of practice learning. So, thank you. So, Scott, I've got to introduce Scott a little bit. Okay. Scott has his view of practice learning. And then we'll talk about the unique partnership between Lawrence Tech and Grand Rapids Community College. So let me do a little introduction for Scott. Okay. Scott is an associate professor and chair in the architecture department at Lawrence Technological University, and he is the founding director of the International Design Clinic, which is a nonprofit that does creative work with communities in need throughout the world. And since founding the International Design Clinic, they have completed over a dozen projects on 4 continents, including an urban tent for the homeless made of reclaimed water bottles. Now, did anybody see the poster for this presentation? That has the person in the reclaimed water. I guess that's an urban tent. So we thought maybe if you looked at the urban tent, you might say, maybe there's some interesting stuff we may want to find out about. So that's why I put that. And Ms. Pease designed the poster, and Mr. Shaw designed the project. Okay. And then the other things was a vision for education based upon borrowed resources for the migrant communities of India, a school system based on the vending architectures of Bolivia that is tailored to the lives of kids working on the street of La Paz. Was that this summer you were working in La Paz? Last 3 summers, okay. And a $2 water filtration system. And I actually have a minister that wants that filtration system for his project in the Dominican Republic, so I need to talk to you after this. Scott Schall's research and creative work in the area has been disseminated widely, including presentations at the 3rd International Symposium on Service Learning in Higher Education, the 2008 International Conference on Informal Settlements and Low-Income Housing, as well as lectures at Brown University, the University of Maryland, the New School for Design at Parsons, and Pratt Institute. And he's also done writing on social responsive design that has been featured in a number of peer-reviewed magazines, including MIT Press, the AIA Press, and the University of Indianapolis Press. Okay. But I will let Scott explain what he does better than I. So I will give the mic to Scott. So thank you. Any questions about what I presented? Okay.
Try not to use the mic. I'm going to try to clip myself. Now we're on.
They say about 10% more.
Thanks.
It's sort of the 80-20 rule. You can get an 80% increase in efficiency by spending about 20% more. And that's the rule that they generally use. And then one thing is sort of interesting. You don't need to go to geothermal or do all that stuff. All you really need is a well-insulated wall and a well-sealed envelope. And they bring air into it with a HRV, which is an air circulating system, and that's how they get the air into the house. So this is the type all insulated house. Yeah.
Oh, now that's fun.
They don't usually get so much into lighting other than just turning it off. But it's more just having well, it's 2 things. It's having a very well-sealed envelope that's well insulated in the attic. They have about 14 inches in the attic, and they have about an RF30 in the walls. And it's also, it insulates them well, and I can't remember what the other thing is. Oh, the furnace is usually a furnace in a house has an drop that BTU value down to about 20,000, because that's all you need to heat the house. And if you have a smaller furnace, it's more efficient to heat the house. So those are the two things that we look at. So you need this.
I need what? Oh, that's what I was fussing about with. Yes.
Right there. That's it. Okay.
Just that easy?
That easy. I hope.
Look at that. All right. Thank you for the introduction. As mentioned, my name is Scott Shull. My research area, and prior to joining LTU, I was not a chair of a program. I was a faculty member, tended to sit to the back of the room, rabble-rouse at appropriate moments, and now I find myself as the face of the program. Doesn't mean I stop rabble-rousing, it just means I couch it differently. Now, when I do socially responsive work around the world, one of the important things to recognize is, although I am an architect and I do take architects with me, the team is not solely made of architects. In fact, when I went to India to do the work, I took a team of 16 students representing 6 universities and 7 disciplines, including a linguist from Reed College and some construction management folks, some artists, some art educators. We were joined by 8 professionals, again, representing a range of disciplines, and then we partnered with 16 students in India, so it's a rather large team. And that's the model I use when I go to Bolivia, when I went to Romania, when I've done work in Louisiana. It's always a similar makeup, a fairly large team made of diverse people, generally younger professionals, because older professionals tend to have family obligations that keep them at home, and we go for about 6 weeks abroad, so that not everyone can do that. But what I've found in those occurrences when we go abroad is that the architects, generally speaking, by and large, tend to assume a place of leadership within this work. And this started me thinking. It was like, am I imagining that? Am I egocentric because I am an architect? And of course, I would imagine that they would rise to the top and be leaders. And no, it's not. I would ask other people who weren't architects, no, that's true. I said, why? They're not the smartest. They didn't get, at least not the best grades, and they're not the most eloquent folk in the room. Linguist, actually, was quite eloquent. So why do they keep rising to the top? And I quickly determined it's because they speak all the languages. That they were the only people on the team that could talk to the artists and engineers and the linguists and anthropologists and teachers and academics with equal eloquence. And it didn't matter really what you threw at them. They were able to address the problems at hand, the situations that we were engaging, look at them for the systems that they were, and then to fold a wide body of people into the work effort. And this caused me pause. I said, how do we develop this ability? We as architects indeed have this ability. How does that occur? And it traced it back to the root of our education. So today, I'm actually not going to speak of my particular form of practice. And I'd be happy to answer questions about my work in Bolivia or Romania or anywhere else. But right now, I actually want to talk about my biases as a teacher. Because I think as the new chair of a fairly large program at Lawrence Tech, I think by exposing my biases to you as a teacher, you might learn a great deal about what's going on at Lawrence Tech, what it means to be an architect. I think more conclusions can be drawn, and maybe it's a little more interesting. So with that, if I can figure that out, oh, there's a heroic teaching slide. I'm going to give you 4 principles. The first principle I'd like to introduce is obviously eloquence from Babel. To earn higher level functioning skills, you must first encounter and experiment through a trial and error, very messy approach with lower order skill sets. There's no 2 ways around it. And you can look at a child understanding the language. How do they do it? Well, they're alone in their crib and they go ba 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 da da ba la ba, right? We've all heard this. And eventually the people around them will respond to one da da. Aha, wait, he said da da, right? That's an exciting moment. The kid sees that and says, that's a word I must remember, right? And then that's coupled with other words, mama, etc. So the kid continues to babble along, and eventually they say bye-bye. This becomes a really important word, because it could be joined with other words. Mama, bye-bye, right? Dada, bye-bye. And all of a sudden, we have what's called a hinge or a pivot or point word, where you can pair it with other words and increase your meaning. The kid gradually develops more and more and more of these words that can be paired with others, again, through trial and error approach. They say a bunch of nonsense before they earn the right to say something that we respond to, that we would consider to be useful. Although it's all useful, and that's kind of the case I'm making. I believe that architecture is one of the few areas where we provide students with the chance to babble. And at LTU, I'm working very hard to increase the potential of our students to babble in a somewhat intelligent way, but always a useful way. So what do I mean by this? So when I was at I was taught at Louisiana for 5 years. deep in the swamps upon completing my graduate work, and then I bounced to Philadelphia, taught at the Tyler School of Art for a while. And while I was at Philadelphia teaching architecture, I was asked to teach a second-year studio focusing on sustainability. There's a crossover, and we didn't rehearse that, right? But look at that. Look at that, what happens. Okay. So these are students. This is their first architectural studio ever taken. And it's a studio that focused on sustainability. And I was determined to root the studio on matters of sustainability that were both ancient and avant-garde. So I was determined that we wouldn't spend the semester talking about photovoltaics the whole time. And I was also determined that we would not talk about passive heating and cooling strategies the whole time, the avant-garde and the ancient. I was determined we'd constantly bounce between the two. And so to start the project, I wanted to root the students' work on some folks that maybe understood those more ancient concepts a little better than we did. So I had them look at the work of landscape artists around the world. Now, more important than the project was the way that I asked them to look at it. I said that you are to research this topic area and to disseminate your research on a 4x4 card. The card may be of any medium, provided that it abides by the framework I give you, that it measures 4 inches by 4 inches, and that you produce 5 every day. And so the students then, okay, that's what I'll do. I'll do 5 every day, these quick little cards. And so this is a student who looked at lightning fields online, printed out all the images he could find, and did a bit of a color study in terms of how the photograph translates the lighting quality and the color quality within lightning fields, a work that we all know, and how the lighting, of course, the sticks, the spokes, the metal. That's a shame. The metal, I'll just put it in my pocket. We're all good. One of the things you learn is also when you work abroad is the ability to improvise. When I was in India, the monsoon started to rain on our computer lab in the midst of our final presentation. So you learn to not stop, although I just did. So he did that study, but more importantly, he did several other studies that supported the idea, and this is, I think, classified in vignette. Yeah. So I gave him a framework. They were to look at this at 4 different scales: the hand, the body, the small group, which would be 3 bodies, and the large group would be 3 small groups, or 9 bodies if we're doing the math, and 18 hands, one would assume. The other, they were look at it through the vignette, the section, the plan, and the diagram. So I took 4 well-known ways that the architect presented the work. And so he did this in one day, plus another one which he threw away because it wasn't worth that much. All right? And so this became his little puzzle where he was dealing with, you could see the diagram, the vignettes at the top, the section and plan and vignettes. And there you go, vignette, section, plan, diagram, hand, body, group, small, and group, large. Now, all told, this took very little time to produce. But more importantly, he could share the work through this common frame with the work of his colleagues. All right? So this is a studio of 16 people. And so what happened is he could say, well, how did you look at your work through these lenses? And then how did I? And start to compare notes. And so within a period of very quick period, you'd have a large set of data to pull from. And what's interesting about this is it develops the ability to babble. There is very little risk embedded in any one vignette. There are probably twice this many that hit the cutting room floor because I gave them a week plus to produce the project. So you do the math, and more actually were eliminated than were actually in the project. And what is built within that is the element of risk, is the freedom to explore within the 4x4 medium, knowing you're not going to spend more than a half hour, an hour on any given one. And so it's a measured risk. And I think that's actually very critical because then what happens is you throw all this up on the wall, and all of the students can pick out various excerpts, so you could trade with one another. Actually, you could just steal. You didn't have to give anything in return. You could say, I like that idea. I'm going to run with that a little bit, and I'm going to combine it with some other ideas. And I'm going to start to develop a position relative to the ancient techniques of dealing with the earth and the forces that inform the earth through the lens of landscape art. Right? And because they all were dealing with a similar framework, they could have actually a somewhat coherent conversation around this. So this is another student taking on a different 4x4 cards. The entire semester was disseminated through 4x4 cards with the exception of a few key moments. So there were literally thousands of these within our studios, and they became a bit like trading cards. And at the end, I actually made the students develop their argument for, because every act of architecture is an argument. I hope you realize that. Right? Architecture is a value construct, value-laden construct. You're taking a position when you put something out in the world. You took a position when you put that out in the world. relative to Habitat for Humanity, relative to sustainability, relative to that neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You pluck something down in the world like that, you've made a statement. You have declared a position. And so the students would develop their argument using these cards. And they had a primary set of arguments that were 8 cards, and then they could support their argument using several other cards to say, this is why I think that. So this was a student dealing with, what was this? Oh, every time it was a matrix, so this was a student dealing with earthborne pollutants. And the scale shifted from site to city, and the time frame shifted from season to year to century. So to start to understand the way earthborne pollutants actually act within the context of a city over the century versus a seasonal cycle. And then that insight, and so each of these maps was based on that. That was complemented by a series of installations that were actually done in the earth. I have a bit of a bias to believing that you need to have unpredictable forces press against what you think you know, right? Unless you won't really know what you know. Does that make any sense at all? That doesn't. Actually, I hope that wasn't recorded. You have to put it out in the earth, in the world, so the world can press against it, so that you generate the knowledge to actually make a statement. Apparently, I didn't put that out in the world. So this is a student that is actually had put a musical instrument out into the world, and as the wind blew across the landscape, it played the instrument, which was then recorded, and the student could then say through the song the direction and the force of the wind. And so the wind became not something that was to be understood by a numeric value, but through a tonal value, which was a very interesting proposition. So this is a student mapping that tone across. All of this eventually resolved itself into much larger, more profound statements. Again, this is a second year, first semester student, first ever project, okay? I want you to understand, these are not students that kind of came preloaded with these qualifications. So this is the entire storm sewer system of Philadelphia mapped out. The site for the project was this little rectangle up there, that red rectangle. The intensity of the line referred to the amount of stormwater that each of those things actually put out into the rivers. Is that me? That is me. I'll just walk around like this the whole time. The color was referring to whether or not it hit our site. So you could see actually the amount of the river impacted by the stormwater that hit our little tiny site. Again, all acts of architecture tend to impact a much, much, much bigger world than is defined by the edges of your site. Whether you admit it or not is beside the point. It doesn't matter. It will. And so this student came to grips with, actually, I impact all of that river. He then cross-referenced that with the pollutants on the river, so that's here, and cross-referenced that with declining and in fish populations. And so impacted the stormwater drainage of his site to declining fish populations in the river. And as a student exploring sustainability, this seemed to be a very useful thing. This student actually developed an architecture of puddling. And if you think of the logic of puddling, what is it? It's just getting water to hang out for a little bit so it doesn't drain right away into the river and instead evaporates into the atmosphere. And so he created a little interesting or profound depending on your position, architectural statement about architecture of puddling, and played with reflectivity and all of that. But the kernel of it was here. This is the base of it, is he wanted to just get it out of the river so that we could stop all the flow of the pollutants. There's a zoom in on it. On the side here, you can see these are the exact calculations of the amount of stormwater that hit the river at every given point. And these are the fish populations there. This document was probably 36 by 24. It was a week-and-a-half project. Another student took his little vignettes and started to map out. He wanted to create a building that would generate enough energy to pull the entire block off the grid, not just his own work, but the whole block, so the architecture becomes a generator. And so he did a series of studies to see whether photovoltaics or wind or what was the best means, geothermal, of actually pulling the block off the grid. This is a student who wanted to maximize 2 yields, geothermal yield and then solar yield in terms of heat gain. And what's interesting is solar yield, you have to expose the inside of the building. Geothermal yield, you want to cover, right? So there was this tension. And this is him trying to resolve that tension through various unfoldings of the landscape to try to maximize geothermal without eliminating the solar. done in a variety of mediums, a variety of studies, playing with massing and programming to material studies, and eventually leading to some interesting propositions in terms of the way that the section might start to behave. So this is a student who's proposing a very tall farm, which I think you'll see here in a moment. You see the top? It's a very tall farm. I think that tractor's on the 3rd floor. I don't know how he gets it up there. But I know that the research that supports that very tall farm is very, very sensible. And it's backed up with a similar thing to the fish population you just talked about. Is he proposing this as a first-time, second-year student of, let's go build one of these? No. Is he proposing it as a very sound architectural argument and a very well-defensed position relative to the architecture on that site? Yes. And that, at that point in time, that's what we were aiming for. Doing light studies, trying to understand that the way that we can maximize the yield of the natural light. And again, never really forgetting, at the end of the day, you're producing an architecture that folk will need to and want to inhabit. Now, before we get to that, the way I think this reaches the ground, and I've been delighted to, since I joined LTU, to be a part of a conversation that pressed far beyond this. Many schools of architecture are actually, I would argue, quite conservative. They're radical in all the same way, which is a different statement. And you can go into many schools of architecture and you can tell by the fact that a lot of folks tend to look the same and tend to say the same words over and over again. The thing that drew me to Lawrence Tech and the thing that makes me excited about this partnership is that it ensures that that doesn't happen. And LTU is an incredibly diverse faculty. They are kooky and brilliant and eccentric and altogether lovely, and somehow find a way to talk with one another, even though they don't actually speak the same language in a lot of regards. And I think that just goes back to the point I'm trying to make here, is we do. They just kind of select terrains that they want to talk about most. At LTU, the way this has been resolved, because of that wonderfully eccentric and kooky faculty, is we've developed a studio core where the lab and the studio are always paired. And so within the studio, which is the cornerstone of most architectural education, it's where you produce something like this, we have stuck a 2-credit-hour lab. And the purpose behind a 2-credit-hour lab is to give students the opportunity to fail and to earn an A for it. It's to give them an opportunity to experiment, to explore, to let the world press against what they put out into it, and to generate knowledge, which can then be fed back into the work. And so I'm excited. This was done just under the auspices of a studio. I think that in years to come, and this is the first time we've done the studio lab, I think we'll do far more interesting things than we've done in this studio by virtue of that structure. A second point is the importance of the thoughtful hand. Movement from basic skills to more complex ones actually follow a predictable route. They start with the tools for the hand, which are focused and haptically based, then tools for the distance receptors, which represent and organize the store of knowledge thereby generated, and then tools for reflection, which enable the learner to see previously acquired tools as propositions and not objects. And so there's a transformation of the thing initially produced. Successful learning environments generally allow for all 3 tool sets, bringing together acts of making, representation, and reflection. An arrangement that allows concrete constructions and the thoughts that describe them to become tools for reflection. As these acts are brought together throughout the curriculum, students can develop the ability to deploy all forms of learning. That was a nice little jam. Thank you for that. I spent 10 years teaching materials and methods of construction prior to becoming chair at Lawrence Tech. And when students would walk through the door, I would hand them an adjective. They would have 1 week then to make concrete that adjective. This student drew green. Right? Other students drew diaphanous, spiky, spongy, right? Sticky, all sorts of things. I would then begin a series of lectures that explained how you cast concrete, the ins and outs of it. I would talk about the struggles Frank Lloyd Wright and others had with concrete. Frank Lloyd Wright called it a reinforced concrete, a petrified sand heap at best in his early career, and then made the Guggenheim. So apparently there was a come to Jesus moment there, and you know, he changed his tune. But I pair all these lectures together. Meanwhile, the students are trying to make a slurry of concrete green. And I think within that is the exact dynamic I'm trying to offer you, is that the thoughtful hand is an important player, that Frank Lloyd Wright's consternation about concrete meant more to the student because of their struggles making concrete green. as did the content I was delivering about how you actually make formwork. I didn't actually talk about quick grips there, but you know, it works. Again, bringing the projects back together, start to share. And so the students drew a spectrum. This was a course taught to 40 students. So they brought, you know, white to black and all through the color spectrum, as well as, you can see Fluffy up there. Yeah, exactly, there's Fluffy. But they're playing with admixtures, they're playing with processes. I had a student put honey, come into the come into the classroom one day with this exploded cube of concrete. What happened? I said, do you know if you put honey in concrete and put it in the microwave, it'll explode? I said, I did not know that. Thank you for sharing. Then, lest you think that frivolous, there was a lot to be said for that moment. That with that audacious irreverence of that student, she took possession of the textbook that she's one day going to rewrite. You're not here just to study the previous memorized givens so that you can replicate. I got to stand like this the whole time. You're not here to memorize givens. You're here to reinvent them. And in my mind, the best time to start that process is now. This is going to be fun. Why don't you just follow me with this? No, that's all right. We'll figure it out. Who said that? That's the kind of brilliance we're seeking at LTU. I'd like to offer you a $5,000. No, I'm just kidding. I can't. All right. Let me see. Is that right? Gosh, he's brilliant. Who else knew that? And you just sat there quietly, Charlotte. How long? It's like having parsley in my teeth, and you're just sitting there laughing. All right, that's fine. Eventually, if a really smart student like that, you know, stepped to the plate. So we performed similar experiments with wood. This was, they drew a joint. So they had a particular joint, ancient technique of joining wood together. And their job was to make a wood cube that celebrated that joint. Didn't just have the joint in it, didn't have a bunch of it, but actually developed its aesthetic from that joint. With acrylic. They then use that work to challenge what a technical drawing is meant to do. And so we teach our students technical documentation, and it forms a certain convention. It's saying, well, if you're actually trying to teach someone how to, I think she was playing with straw and adhesive. If you're trying to teach someone how to replicate that process, what information do you need to put on the page? And sometimes, this is when I was in Louisiana, this was a 2 or 3 part course sequence, so we could get really big. So this is the student playing, she developed, they were given a 1 foot by 1 foot by 6 foot area to celebrate their findings. And so this was a student that did this. This was meant to magnify the light of a single tea candle. This is now in a Buddhist monastery in Louisiana. I take great pride in that. This is a student, so this was a project where I asked the students, while we were studying how to resist decay, how to prevent rot in your building, how to keep your buildings up, I made them develop a vessel that celebrated decay and rot and tried to find a beautiful aesthetic voice out of it. And so actually this concrete back was stained to match the steel upon installation. So the student would know exactly how much the steel had changed from its original install. And then the moment of great pride as an educator is when he came out with the spoon and put it there. Anyone know why I took great pride in that? Huge moment. Something called galvanic action. It's when dissimilar metals contact one another and are connected by water, they will cause a pronounced deterioration or reaction one to another. I was like, he listened to that lecture. All right, it was a glowing moment. Proud papa. All right, moving on. Eventually, again, finding a way that they bring themselves to bear to redefining what a technical drawing is meant to do. Is it meant to just tell you how to construct? Is it meant to talk about your convictions about the design at that particular moment? What's it meant to do? And then moving forward. So as these develop, they're eventually going to, as your tools for the hand, distance receptors develop, they're going to contact fields that you think are outside of the world of architecture. It's just naturally going to happen. Now, although you must be careful to avoid digression, to ignore these naturally occurring extensions is a mistake. And for our students, we need to teach them how to engage these areas without pretending to be an expert in them. So as an example here, this is a first semester, third year studio on sustainability, which was sustainable urban environments. And so these were a series of maps that students produced. This was in a mixed-use area, a lot of bars and eateries you could see here. What this is mapping is the amount of trash produced. Green is recyclable, gray is non-recyclable. This is the distance to the eventual home of the trash. So you can, miles is the bottom axis down here. Mass or amount is this axis, so the bigger the block, the more stuff. And so you could get a visual imprint immediately of how far stuff travels. The fact that this is a giant block far away means something pretty significant, right? And the fact that the green blocks are smaller and pushed this way means something significant to the designer. This is a student playing with demographics, actually, in the neighborhood and pairing that with etymology of street names. Eventually, this would lead to a series of proposals, urban design proposals. So this was a student, this was on the river in Philadelphia. This was a student who was using remediation to bring agriculture back to the cityscape and then using the freeway to develop a market here where you'd have on-off ramps into the market so that the trafficking of fruits and vegetables could be propped up by the speed of the freeway. This is a student who made an argument that we are currently underutilizing our freeways, and he paired that with research on fossil fuels and paired that with the amount of money we put into our highways. And he's saying, actually, we should put that money into the deterioration of our highways and start to creatively destroy the highways to develop new estuaries and places for the plant animal life that we've pushed aside for the highways. We should use that. And so this is his, century plan, right, for one highway, and how we would eventually get to that point. Now, these are interesting ideas. This is a student who recognized the amount of dollars we put into remediation. Remediation tends to occur behind really tall fences where we can ignore it and not pay attention to something that is a pretty horrible thing. Remediation is a good thing, but the land that we're remediating, we really messed up, right? And so it's hiding that a little bit. And how that remediation land generally occurs in areas where two things happen. Number one, libraries are being closed at a really, really high rate. And number two, bus service is actually being increased at a really, really high rate because you have people moving into areas with blighted land, and no libraries generally need buses because they don't have cars, right? So these things are tied together. She made an argument that why don't we expose the remediation process by creating a several-mile-long green strip down the center of our city. We would then develop bus and information hubs underneath that. The library would be redefined as a bus stop where you could get data imports and log on, because who reads a book anymore anyways, right? So let's use the remediation dollars to actually update what a library needs to be for next century. Right? Radical proposal. Oh my gosh, my mind was just blown. This is a third-year student putting this out. And what's interesting about this is these students, every year I would enter them into the Ed Bacon competition in Philadelphia, which was something that was designed for graduate urban design and urban planning students, teams of students. 3 different sets of architecture students won that award in several different years. And again, great pride in that because they were the only undergraduates and the only architects to win the award the 3 years that we entered. Everyone else was graduate students from Cornell or Penn, and then our little team from Temple. And I think it's rooted, again, to this ability to take diverse points of view and to synthesize them into a pretty interesting and fairly grounded proposition. This is a student saying we actually don't have a problem with green space. We have a problem with single membrane and double membrane roofing over Walmarts. That's our problem because the way the heat is treated, et cetera, et cetera. So he's saying what we need to do is we need to peel this up here. Let's use Walmart as a flood wall because these waters are already rising. And there's nothing we're going to do to stop that. So they're coming up. Walmart's really tall. So let's use that as a flood wall. Let's build the green on top of the Walmart. Let's start to bring the highways in because when you're going to Walmart, you want to get in and get out, right? That's the whole gig. Maybe we can use the highways to kind of drive through the Walmart. You pre-order your stuff, they load you up, and you zip right out. Why, you're not there in Walmart to hang out with your cart, are you? So why don't we eliminate that whole cart nonsense and just automate the whole process? People will load your goods right into your car and you zip off. Really interesting idea. I don't think it's going to work, but I'm glad someone talked about it. The students were then challenged to develop a 100-foot by 700-foot slice of this project. The trick is they could use only cardboard unless they proved the need to use additional materials. And that condition forced the students to be very creative with cardboard. Did I say concrete? Cardboard, good. They started to use polyurethane on it. They started to sand it. They started to break it. They started to recombine it. They started to make their own cardboard, all because of restraint. I believe restraint, and I found this in my own work as in humanitarian work within fringe settlements around the world, restraint actually kindles the creative process. It does not push it down. And so this was using restraint, and the models I think are really compelling because the student had to prove the right to use the bristles of a broom. Another shot of the model. The students then took, another key strategy I believe for architects is to develop the ability to move between mediums very quickly. And so to say, I understand the questions that are inherent with a chunk of cardboard or with charcoal or with Revit. All of these things represent your ideas differently, and they all ask different questions of your work. And so this is a student, these are photographs of a model, the cardboard model, taken and collaged together in Photoshop to try to understand the experience put forward by that slice. And then developing working drawings out of that. And this was a time base, so this was a student that paired the remediation process with the different pools that were, this is a radical student. I love students like this, take some risks. He charted the countries in the world that had public baths, that had nudity as a part of the public bath, and they all had really low crime rates. And so he made the argument that seeing each other naked made you less likely to murder each other. Not so many words, but that was his argument, right? He said everywhere where we're really, really uptight about that, we're killing each other all the time, and everywhere we have public baths, we're not. And so let's actually use the remediation process to develop baths here, and let's use the fact that when things are composted, heat is generated, so let's make that heat the bath. And then, so he paired the whole remediation process with the various pools, and I know it's radical, I'm not proposing, I'm not saying we should do this, but really good for him, right? This is a student that actually is using composting techniques to generate land in areas where the land value would support that. In the interim, it looks a bit like this. All right. The final goal, I think, is developing what I'm calling dialogic practices from collaborative frames. Well-formed architectural practice is transdisciplinary. The work produced by the architect, whether in the form of a physical or theoretical construct, is by nature in conversation with myriad factors, including those of economic, social, cultural, and political origin. Correspondingly, the ultimate goal of architectural research and creative work is not to craft eloquent monologues, but to instigate regenerative dialogues. To do this well, the architect must first develop the ability to offer knowledge clearly in a manner that's understandable, approachable, and relevant to experts within a range of fields. Due in large part to the difficulties associated with this process, it's far easier to create relevant work when one considers a narrow audience. This is an endeavor often avoided by the student. Thus, it falls to the educator to create strategically positioned opportunities for students to develop the skill set and form dialogical practices required by a naturally transdisciplinary field. To illustrate this, I'm going to point to a class that I teach called Guerrilla Altruism. I've offered it several semesters at Temple. It's now a studio at LTU. And the way it starts is I ask the students to research well a resource that is of some relevance to a large body of people. This is researching water. And so the student is then asked to share that research with their classmates, a group of people who are paying tuition, earning a grade, and thus somewhat motivated to sit there and listen to whatever nonsense the student wants to say, right? You can't go anywhere. You're in the class too. And so we start from that point. So this is a student saying who has clean water access and, couching in billions. But very quickly, I ask the student to share it with a larger and larger body of people. So say, okay, that's fine. You've shared it with your classmates. Your classmates think what you're saying is pretty interesting. Now go share it with those classes right outside there in the college. People who aren't paid or paying to listen to the gibberish that you're saying. Now you have to say it in a more compelling way. And so the students gradually develop the ability to start to create, and there's a lot of depth. I want you to understand there's a lot of depth to this little game board. Although the hook is very easily understood, you could read this for quite a while and gain knowledge. And then continuing to kind of press the advantage, say, okay, now what do you do if you don't have 20 minutes to develop your argument? What happens if you have 2 seconds? What's your elevator pitch? All right. So this was a student trying to share their research about the percentage of tap water in Aquafina, 100, and trying to share that knowledge with the people on campus who were plunking down major dollars to drink tap water because it was branded well, right? And so this was actually, she installed this in all of the university water things, substituting for the Aquafina that was there. She found a way to slip it in there so it said Aqua Tappa, so you're actually, took people water to realize that. She then turned her research and recognized the fact that Philadelphia over the last 100 years had gone from a place of 100 miles of streams to 100 miles of sewers, storm sewers. That's a huge transition, right? And so she started a movement where she and her friends and people joined this movement, started to tag all of the former stream beds in Philadelphia using these blue ribbons, just tying them around light poles, or you're like, is this architecture? When do we get to architecture? There's no bricks and mortar there, right? But the student is developing a critical skill set. The skill of being able to assess a very large infrastructure that has somehow gone amok, look at the resources they have at their disposal, which as students, not a lot of scratch, but maybe a little bit of influence, maybe a little bit of a network. And how do you harness the asset you have at your disposal to achieve maximum effect? That's not a bad lesson for any designer to learn. This was a student that did a taste test at Rittenhouse Square. She bought stuff from a farmer that was 10 feet that way and stuff from a McDonald's that actually 10 double cheeseburgers 10 feet that way, and then made a stew of each of those ingredients and offered free taste tests, so you could taste test the 10 double cheeseburger mixed stew, which is really nasty, or the farmer's stew over there, and then she distributed, of course, nutritional information about these two things. Again, this was actually not an architecture student, but she talked to some of the students who were architects in there, and what it became about is, where do you position the work? When do you position the work? What side? Where do you locate it? It was really important. There was 10 feet here and 10 feet there, right? Oh, is that it? Is that the last slide? Well, I want to end on something more positive. We'll keep it there, but I'm going to end somewhere else. I see this happening in fairly profound ways, and not just because I'm taking students to Bolivia every summer and we're doing work within fringe settlements, or the fact that Steve Coy, one of my associates, takes students to Berlin where they do street art with street artists there. We're going to Shanghai. We're about to build a Detroit center, which is going to allow us to do to consolidate all of our existing community-centered work in Detroit under one roof, which will be great. It'll be in full effect by the time you guys arrive, potentially. But it's embedded in everything that we do. And so within Jim Stevens' work in the Make Lab, where they do rapid prototyping and digital fabrication, I believe the same spirit is in play. And it has led to a very productive conversation. I'm going to end full circle with Habitat for Humanity, because you started there. I'm going to end there, right? And we didn't plan this. Did I mention that once? Okay, I did. All right. So I've been talking with Habitat for Humanity. When I first arrived, Tim Ruggles of Habitat for Humanity in Pontiac was so gracious as to invite me into a conversation, and he asked me to share a little bit about the creative work, which I've not shown you today. You can find on your own on the website, or we can talk about in a bit, which I did. But then I talked about the work of my colleagues, which is every bit as compelling, if not more so. I said, I want you to talk to the board. Okay, we'll talk to the board. So we talked to the board at Habitat for Humanity, made introductions. They are now interested in working with us to innovate the way that they actually construct their homes. And what's exciting about that is Habitat for Humanity is a great organization, and they do fantastic work, and the spirit of that organization is bang on. But they, like a lot of folks, still use Victorian-era construction techniques, which is quite ludicrous when you think about how much the auto industry has evolved in terms of the way they pump an automobile out into the world. It's night and day from what it was 100 years ago. Yet architecture still gets out their hammer, and throws up some studs. And so we have a number of faculty members that are pressing against that and saying maybe there are other ways that we can build. Maybe there are ways that we can use some of the cutting-edge technologies in other fields, as dialogical practices, right, to begin to talk about how architecture might be produced in the future. And what's exciting about this partnership is an organization I deeply respect that has great community roots coming and saying, you know what, we agree. We need to innovate. We want to innovate because we think it will help us achieve our mission if architecture can stop get out of the dark ages and maybe start to talk with other people who know how to produce work a little bit better and begin to innovate in the production of architecture or continue the innovation process. So I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited for what that means for LTU. And maybe it's a symbol of a little bit of what I've been talking about here today. So with that, I'll end it. I thank you for listening. I hope you gained something interesting from it. And I guess I'm available for questions. We are available for questions?
Available for questions, because we actually, that was a good contrast, because
Thank you.
what I would probably say is, in residential construction right now, anybody read the newspaper on Sunday? They don't have enough people to do the construction in Grand Rapids anymore. But our program, which is residential construction, and the sustainable residential design is using the old format, but they need those people now.
They do.
Now, the next generation will be, well, how do you evolve that Habitat for Humanity house? How do you get it so using more contemporary materials? So we're always caught in that. We're caught in that where we are right now because we offer AutoCAD education and Rivet education. Well, all the offices use AutoCAD. Oh, that's fine. But the next generation is Rivet. So we are sort of, we want to teach them what's up and coming. And Scott and Lawrence Tech wants to teach them what's up, what's coming next. And so we're always sort of in that force of, here's what's being used now, but how do we take them to the next generation? So, but it's always, it makes
I think
it
it's a value add, I guess my argument would be. And I come at this from, I think Lawrence Tech has a great history of kind of a practice-driven education.
I might have that slide.
And I take great pride in the fact that 65% of our students before they graduate have a job in the field. I think that's a great thing to be able to tell someone, and it's true. I take great pride in the fact that 90% of our graduates have a job in the field upon graduation. There aren't other schools in the country that can say that, and I take great pride in that, but I'm even more optimistic than that when we start to break the walls out of what does practice mean. And maybe it's because I'm an optimist, I believe that the practice of architecture is not the same as it was in the 60s. I love Mike Brady. I don't think that's the beginning of end of architectural practice, right? It's groovy and all that, but we can move on, right? I believe that architects with their education, and the actual economic downturn recently showed this, is that what happens when you take a really well-trained, very intelligent, motivated workforce, put them into a field that doesn't have room for it? Did they just give up with life and say, well, that's it, time to move on? No. They go find other areas to busy themselves. And what happened in architecture is they started to say, well, why are we waiting around for jobs to come through our door? Why don't we actually start taking some courses in real estate development and become involved in that conversation? So instead of waiting for money to come through the door saying, hey, will you build me a cool condo or actually design me a cool condo? We'll say, you know what, we're actually going to go to the banker ourselves with a great plan because we can understand that. And most architects have that aptitude if they have the training to back it up. The same thing as you look at shop architects. I mean, everyone know Pruitt-Igoe House, right? The housing development. Everyone's heard this. There was a housing development in Pruitt-Igoe in this tower based on a series of theories and principles, and it was not as successful as it may have wanted to be. Let's just say that. Is that safe? Yeah. That's safe. It wasn't as successful as it should have been or could have been or wanted to be. And so it came tumbling down. They imploded the thing. And people correctly point to this as a giant symbolic moment in architecture where the practice would say, this is no longer the way we're going. Another one happened recently. And it was when Frank Gehry, you know Frank Gehry, right? He does the big
Balboa
yeah.
Art Museum.
Yeah, right.
And the
Bilbao, Guggenheim,
Bilbao,
and he was on The Simpsons once. He did a sandwich, I think, that looked like this as well. Right? He's very, very famous. Anyways, he was doing the Barclays Center for the Brooklyn Nets. I don't know, when they were moving from Jersey to Brooklyn, they got a brand new arena. And he was trying to make it work, and he couldn't make it work. He couldn't make the dollars line up. And so then through a series, they eventually tried to bring in a whole series of failed efforts to say what happens post-Gehry when this isn't going to work. And they eventually brought in a group of architects named Shop architects out of New York. And the interesting thing about Shop architects is they're architects, but they also have real estate and fabrication and construction in their background, and they've developed this expertise. And they developed it by rightly saying some of the things I'm saying, where, okay, we as architects have a great trade, and we can do some great work with traditional methods of construction. We can keep pumping that out, and that's good. And I'm not saying that we should stop that by any means. We should keep doing that. They said, you know, we actually believe that we can get a bigger piece of the development pie if we go to the development. We actually believe that we know quite a bit about fabrication, so why are we trying to explain how to fabricate this thing that we've designed to this manufacturer over there? Why don't we just fabricate it? So they did. And I said, well, wait a minute. Now I'm struggling to explain how to put together this thing we fabricated to the contractor over here. So why don't we just put it together? And so they did. And they named those 4 different businesses, right? Shop, I forget what the names are, Shop, Build, Shop, Construct, whatever it is. That firm got the job to the Barclays and designed the Barclays Center where the New Jersey Nets play right now. And I view that as a paradigm shift in the field. I view that as a moment where the traditional mode of practice, where the architect passively waits for big dollars to come through their door so they get to build something that hopefully someone else will do well. I believe that moment was architects taking possession of the entire design delivery system, from the moment of the investment to the execution of the work. And I believe that we as a field, having educated students that are some of the best and brightest that we can produce, are fully capable of taking the reins of that field as it will develop over the next several decades. And there will always be a place for the folks that practice in a traditional manner, and that's fine and good. But at Lawrence Technological University, I believe we need to press our advantage at this moment in time. And I believe we need to educate a field that's not willing to just sit back and wait passively for dollars to come through the door so maybe they can design something cool. I want to produce students who actively go seek that out and change the world in the process. And I do that when I go to Bolivia. We go and we don't wait because there are no dollars in a fringe settlement. They don't even have cops. They don't have a mayor. They don't have building structures. They have nothing. You go and proactively start meeting people. You build consensus and communities around creative work, and you develop that way. It's a proactive approach, and the only way you can do humanitarian design in a fringe settlement is if you're proactive. If you sit and wait, you're going to be waiting a while. And if we as architects want to impact a much broader world than we've ever occupied in the past, that's the way you need to operate. Yes?
Yeah, I always had a preconceived notion. I've always had a preconceived notion that science controlled architecture. Preconceived that science always controlled architecture. Like the scientists would say, you know, I want this idea put into place. Mm-hmm. But I'm starting to see that there's nobody really back there behind the curtain saying, hey, you know, I want this. It's the other way, where the architect's saying, hey, Mr. Scientist, can you build this Zimfro plant because I want my building to be green, and I want it to be portable and treat water treatment, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of interesting that you're talking about architecture pushing science in the opposite, and that's pretty exciting.
I am incredibly optimistic, and it's nothing that I've done or anyone in this room can take. It's just the fact that this field has positioned itself well relative to the creative and information-laden world we find ourselves in right now. Why does anyone memorize facts anymore when we can all pull out our phones and do the same in less time? Why? The ability to memorize facts and givens is no longer the currency of achieving much of anything in this world unless you want to go to Jeopardy. In Jeopardy, it's great, right? In Trivial Pursuit, it's great. It's a good bar trick. But if you want to actually assume a place of leadership in this world, there are 2 things you need to do. You need to be able to navigate an ever-increasing body of information well and creatively. That's number 1. You are bombarded with information on a daily basis. It's in your pocket. worlds of libraries are sitting in all of our pockets, and this is a jaw-dropping thing, right? Those who can navigate that well are going to do better than those that cannot. It's as simple as that. The second thing that you need to be able to do is to dialogue. To be able to navigate it well, it's related. You need to be able to speak the languages represented by those bodies of knowledge on the phone. And to your point, if we want to talk about sustainability, we can't just talk about green content drywall. When I taught the sustainability studio, I said, all right, because the student was talking about green content drywall, recycled product drywall. I said, great. Wandsov is made with a sweatshop in India. Is it sustainable? Well, it's obviously not sustainable, right? Okay, well, let's talk about those things. Now, let me ask you a question. Is it more sustainable for you to get a bottle of wine from France or a bottle of wine from, and we were in Philly at the time, from California? There was hemmed and hawed about this, and it's actually from France, because when you amortize the pollutants cast into the air by a ship over the number of bottles of wine that a ship can passage versus those on a truck, right? It actually meant from a sustainability perspective. But how can you ever have that knowledge? I've memorized it because it's a fun party trick. But generally speaking, that's information that you need to be able to analyze and synthesize back together something meaningful, a position. Right? Not just about where you borrow wine, but how your multi-million-dollar condo is going to be clad, and whether you're going to use stone hewn from the mountains in, Budapest, or whether you're going to use West Virginia stone. And that's not always the easy decision you think it is. It's a complex decision, and I'm delighted to say that architects are equipped to make those complicated decisions. And there are very few fields out there where you graduate and you can talk to an artist and engineer with equal dexterity, and this is one of them.
Other questions? We did promise as part of this presentation that we would talk about the partnership. I guess we've been talking about the partnership.
I have, but just not directly.
So part of the partnership, who's picked this up? Okay. Does anybody else need, if you want to try to find out about the community college and the partnership between Lawrence Tech and the community college, I need to sort of deliver this to you.
And give them a blue. If you haven't taken a blue,
blue
get
one.
one
So
of those
here,
as
well,
well.
Who else needs? Delivery.
So as you're delivering, I'm going to talk a little about, so when I arrived at Lawrence Tech, they had really wonderful scholarships for GPAs, and that's great. I love GPAs as much as the next guy, right? But there weren't many for other aptitudes that lead to a successful career in architecture or any of the design fields. So two things you'll see in that blue folder, one of which I supported, the other one I birthed and support still. The first was the portfolio scholarship. We give scholarship dollars, big scholarship dollars, 30,000 scholarship dollars. It's a 5-year renewable $6,000 scholarship, I believe, for your portfolio work. It's a portfolio of creative work. That's real scratch. When I came, I said, but what about a student that maybe hasn't had a chance to develop a portfolio, but they have a couple brilliant works? So we started the Motor City competition. The Motor City competition is designed to give scholarships to a single piece of artwork that critically and creatively engages the idea of Motor City. Doesn't equal Detroit. It means, what does that nickname really mean? What's at stake? We have a winner in this room, actually, right? And the Motor City Scholarship is a 4-year renewable $10,000 scholarship. That's $40,000. And because we value this partnership, we have 2 different categories. One for high school students coming into college for the first time, and one to people within our community college partners. This is a community college partner. So we have a specific scholarship set up for students who are here to the tune of 4-year renewable $10,000 for the best in show, and then several other scholarships that are 4-year renewable $4,500 or 18 grand. All told, every year Lawrence Tech gives $188,000 away to scholarships. I thought I'd be shot down when I suggested this idea. They said, sure, let's do it. All right, I should have gone for $200,000. But that's, I think, a very important piece of everything I'm talking about there. GPA is a measure of one type of aptitude. Standardized tests measure one type of aptitude. If we want students who are able to thrive in the diverse and frenetic thing that I'm talking about now, we need students that also have creative capacity, measured through prolonged creative capacity, portfolio, as well as that brief moment of brilliance, the single piece of artwork.
Let
Yeah.
I'll do the first. Actually, this is. Has anybody gotten these? This just sort of explains the overall. That in the centerpiece, is there's an architectural design degree here that transfers to Lawrence Tech, the Master of Architecture. We're also talking about the Bachelor of Interior Architecture, which is more of an interiors degree. So you can, if you take the first 2 years here, you can transfer your junior and the Integrated Design Studio. You can transfer your junior year into Lawrence Tech and continue on the third, fourth, and graduate year onto a Master of Architecture. Or you can go on your third and fourth year to a Bachelor of Interior Architecture. Now, Scott has said put those two together and you're even more powerful in what you do. But those are the opportunities available to you by starting at Grand Rapids Community College. We also have some other options available for you. It talks about our agreements with Ferris State University and some degrees you can do with that. But the focus of this was on the Lawrence Tech partnership. So this little brochure talks about that. And if you turn to the second page, which is one thing that happens when you get older, you can't turn very well anymore. You will see, start with a 2-year architectural degree at GRCC and take 2 LTU integrated design studios. And we have the students for the design studios here. And then you can transfer your junior year to LTU, the second page back. Just flip it to the second page, okay? But in order to do that, I always have to put a focus on this. You need to take 4 courses. If you're in your freshman year here and you're trying to go to the Integrated Design Studio, which is at your sophomore year, you've got to take 2 architectural graphics courses and 2 art courses, AR 201, AR 202, and the 2 art courses, which is 2D and 3D design. That's if you get in here your freshman year and you want to take the Integrated Design class your sophomore year. Now, the degree, we actually offer a 2-year degree for this curriculum. And it's called, if you go back to the third page, it's called the Architectural Design degree. And these are the classes you take. After you take 64 credit hours, you get an architectural design degree. You take those 64 credit hours and the Integrated Design Studio, and you transfer to your junior year at Lawrence Tech. Okay? Now, if you go back to your third and fourth page, let's see if I can. There's one that says Lawrence Tech. What this third page tells you that says Lawrence Tech is just here are the courses we offer, and they equal their courses. Now, you could do this by going to Lawrence Tech freshman and sophomore year, but the advantage is our tuition's a little bit less, and you can stay here for 2 years, which has its advantages. Mm-hmm. And these are what our courses equal. And let's see. But I will also, let's flip back to the one. It's sort of like 4 pages from the end. There's one that says Master of Architecture program. On the upper left, it says Master of Architecture. It's about 4 or 5 pages back. Just flip one more. There we are. It's a Master of Architecture. So those first 2 years that you see listed there, you take here. It says Master of Architecture at the top. Does everybody find that one? I don't want to. Should have next time I say I got to number these pages. Should have gone through with a pen and numbered them for you. But it says Master of Architecture. But the reason I bring this page up is that the first 2 years are listed here as what you take here at Grand Rapids Community College. And you also take the Integrated Design Studio. And then there's a third, fourth, and fifth year on there. And you take the third, this is the third and fourth, and this is the fifth year, you get a Master's of Architecture degree. Now, you don't pass go, you don't collect $200, you go directly and get a Master's of Architecture degree. Now, so you spend the first 2 years here, go the third and fourth year to Lawrence Tech, and then your fifth year, you can actually do that for the most part online.
Master program. Yeah.
The master program, okay? And then at the end of that, you get a Master's of Architecture degree, okay? Now, I will tell you from my own experience, a Master's of Architecture degree, they open up many doors for you. They really do. Now, there are some people who also want another option of, well, maybe I want to go into interiors. Well, there's also, if you take the first 2 years here, you can also, the second to last page talks about a Bachelor of Interior Architecture. So you can also, after taking the first 2 years here, get a third and fourth year in a Bachelor of Interior Architecture degree, which is an interior design degree. It's nationally accredited, NCIDQ accredited? Is that? I'd have
NASAD?
to- What?
NASAD?
NASA accredited. So that's a nationally recognized accreditation of an interior architecture degree. So that's
CETA?
another option for you.
CETA?
What?
CETA?
CETA. It's CETA? Okay. I'm aware of NAAB, National Architectural Accreditation Boards. That's one because I'm an architect. So. But there's also, but I've worked with many interior architects. A lot of them worked for Steelcase and did a lot of work with them. Okay. Now, and then the final page of that is just reiterating what I started at the front page. Okay. So, but all I'm saying is all the innovativeness that happens at Lawrence Tech, we actually get into the second year in the integrated design studio here. So, and we have that integrated design studio on this campus on the second year. So, take the first 2 years here, transfer your junior year to Lawrence Tech. That's what I'm here to talk about, our unique partnership. So, questions?
I think it's important that you, as you pursue architecture, that you go on fact-finding missions. And so I would talk to the students. There are students here who are in the midst of this program. We believe very strongly in our partnership with GRCC and other community colleges because to do all the great things I'm talking about, you need to recruit a diverse student body. And as university cost increases, you are taking that diversity away a little bit because fewer and fewer people can afford that. And so one of the ways that I have found, and I think we have found to deal with that, is to form strong partnerships with community colleges to develop that kind of the foundational experience. And then we can take that foundational experience and build on it. Now, as pointed out, there are significant assets to that and there are significant deficits to that. And the nature of, I would say the degree, allows you a lot of latitude. And that's probably the best feature, is that you can take the 2 years completely here and then go on. You can take 2 years and go on to interior architecture. You can take 2 years and go on to architecture and interior architecture. In fact, we have dual degrees with civil engineering, media communications, arch engineering. Architecture marries well with a lot of things. I think that elasticity of the field I spoke of is evident by the fact that if I went to business and said, let's get a dual degree, we just call it real estate, right? So I would, this is a lot of time, for those of you that's contemplating this career path, this is a lot of time and effort. Can we agree on that? And what you want to do is to do your due diligence, find out all the different paths, talk to the students, ask David questions about GRCC, ask me questions about LTU, ask us questions about the partnership, drive to LTU, stay here, do whatever it takes to find the facts so you can make a good decision. Yes? That's safe to say?
Yes, that's good. I like your perspective. That's good. Okay. Okay. Other questions? Now, if you like, you can also talk to us one-on-one. So, I mean, that's also part of the deal. And the other thing, anything else you?
No.
Okay. Well, we thank you very much for coming. If you want to come down after this and talk to us individually, we welcome it. Tom Boersma is also here. He's our department chair. Charlotte Pease is also here. She'd be glad to talk to you too. Also, if they haven't taken the cookies away, please take a cookie with you. And there's ice water up there, so please feel free to also eat those. But we want to thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this, and we hope you gain some enlightenment coming tonight. So thank you for coming.